What about the supernatural feats, the miracles? Did Jesus do miracles?
Well, I certainly believe he did. Whenever a historian is evaluating that kind of issue, what we have to understand is miracles are, by definition, unrepeatable events. They're unique incursions into space of time. They're not ordinary events. And they're not subject to scrutiny in a scientific laboratory. We can't reproduce a miracle in a laboratory. So it's no good talking about the scientific evidence for miracles if we mean by that the kind of things that we could reproduce and prove or falsify in a laboratory. We're talking about unique historical events. When we're evaluating whether Jesus did miracles or not, what we're dealing with is the veraciousness of the testimonies about Jesus as a miracle worker. Now, what's interesting to me is that it's not just the New Testament that claims that Jesus was a miracle worker. Later Jewish traditions, who rejected that Jesus was the Messiah, also attest that Jesus did miracles. It is also true that some of the later Greco-Roman sources as well also attest that Jesus was a miracle worker. And then, of course, we have the famous testimony of Josephus to the same effect. Do we have credible testimonies that Jesus did miracles? I think we do have some of those. If you have presuppositions that miracles don't happen, then none of that's going to be
Yeah, a lot of the scholars, for example, that are being quoted in Time or Newsweek would say, yeah, Jesus did miracles, but you got to take the context of 2,000 years ago, where people just kind of believed in that thing. Tom Wright, I think, at Oxford says, we're the last 200 years, we think we're the only guys that understand what history is. Right. Those people didn't. What's the tip-off? What's the evidence that shows those people weren't so easy to fake in terms of these miracles? They knew the truth between a guy coming back from the dead and somebody that was just passed out.
Well, the very fact that they use terms like signs and wonders or mighty works, dunamis is the Greek word that's used by Mark about Jesus' miracles, distinguishing those events from other ordinary events like sleeping or eating or whatever, shows that they're critically sifting their historical experience. Some things are miracles, some things are not miracles. Now, if you want to paint ancient people as simply naive, gullible people who bless their hearts, they couldn't possibly tell the difference between a miracle and a fake. Well, I think the response to that is an arrogant modern assumption about ancient people. The truth of the matter is, if you actually read ancient sources, that ancient peoples critically dealt with these kind of issues just as we do today.
One fellow was quoted as saying, when Jesus is said to heal people and cast out demons, this can only be true in the sense that in the first century, sick people were thought to be possessed by evil spirits. So here you have it coming up again.
The theory that whenever we're dealing with the demonic, it's some kind of psychosomatic illness which can be healed through therapy or something like that. Well, I think it is fair to say that first century persons lived in the age before modern medicine. It's plausible from a historical point of view to say, okay, some things that they attributed to the demonic were simply natural diseases. I think that's a plausible thing to say. I think you could actually demonstrate that that's the case. But what you cannot say is that all the accounts, for example, exorcisms, in the case of Jesus' exorcisms, could actually be explained that way. That's what I would want to say about it. There are some exorcism accounts which simply don't have the cash value of some kind of psychosomatic illness. We're dealing with something far more profound and frightening, frankly, than a psychosomatic illness. And so, that sort of issue would have to be weighed and sifted as well.
What do you think about the accounts of Jesus walking on water or of healing the blind?
Well, in the Old Testament, it's not ever claimed that any of the great prophetic figures healed the blind. Now, this is interesting. If it was true, as some have claimed, that the stories about Jesus are simply taking Old Testament stories and predicating them of Jesus and claiming, well, if they did these sort of things, Jesus did them as well. The interesting thing about that is, nowhere do any of the prophetic figures in the Old Testament give sight to the blind. Yet we have in all the layers of tradition, whether we're thinking of Mark, Matthew's special source, Luke's special source, the Gospel of John, and all of these sources, Q as well, in all of these sources, we have evidence that Jesus gave sight to the blind. We have multiple attestation to this from the sources that we have. Now, if we have multiple witnesses to this, then the evidence is got to be taken as strong that he